As I make my way down Resident Evil's past, I finally find myself playing Resident Evil 0. Now this game is a little bit odd. When people talk about classic Resident Evil and how great it is, Resident Evil 0 is rarely ever mentioned. Resident Evil Remake and Resident Evil 0 came out in the same year on the GameCube exclusively. And you can find a ton of people on YouTube and social media praising Resident Evil Remake, but not Resident Evil 0. And after playing it myself for the very first time, I actually understand why. Before we continue this review, please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the hype button. I'm showing you what the hype button is right now. I'm grateful for each and every one of you stopping by, as there's so many people on YouTube that you could be watching right now, but you decided to check out my video. I'm thankful for Jehovah God and Jesus Christ for bringing me into a new year, and I hope you all have a blessed 2026, and I hope you all enjoyed this review. Now let's get back into it. Resident Evil 0 is a prequel to Resident Evil 1. The idea of making a prequel to Resident Evil 1 had been around since 1996. Resident Evil 0 actually started off as a game for the 64DD. Due to low sales and Capcom working on so many other projects, they didn't actually get done working on the final script for Resident Evil 0 until 1999, which explains why the story in this game really isn't all that great. Sure, you get to learn about the inner workings of Umbrella. You get to see the corruption that even amongst colleagues, these guys were fighting against each other for power and position, but this is also stuff that you didn't really need to hear or see, because all of this was already explained in every other Resident Evil game that came before it. Even seeing the origins or somewhat origins of Wesker and Birkin and their relationship really didn't do much for me. Don't get me wrong, the story overall isn't bad, but it just falls flat in comparison to Resident Evil 1, 2, 3, and Code Veronica. Even the dynamic between Rebecca and Billy, it almost felt like it was going somewhere, then it just fell off a cliff. In the beginning, they didn't trust each other for obvious reasons, Billy being a convict and Rebecca thinking that he murdered many people made her a bit standoffish, but it didn't take long for her to realize that she needed to work with Billy. And outside of learning Billy's background story, they really don't grow much from that standpoint. So you're talking about hours and hours of gameplay and story where these two characters never evolve or change. This is really weird because every other Resident Evil game has two or more characters interacting with each other, whether you play as them or not. And their relationship grows throughout the game. It just feels like in the midway point, their relationship stops growing and they just fight off the rest of the zombies until the game ends. Even from Rebecca's standpoint, I would have thought that this game would have showed Rebecca evolving as a character. In the beginning, she's very frightened. And then as the game goes on, I was thinking she would have evolved into like some type of badass character like every other Resident Evil character in the past. But they really couldn't have done that because remember, this is a prequel to Resident Evil 1. And in the beginning of Resident Evil 1, Rebecca wasn't incompetent by any stretch of the imagination, but she also still held a type of fear for the enemies around her. So they couldn't make her too brave because it wouldn't make sense for her to be so frightened when she fights even weaker type of zombies in Resident Evil 1. So overall, the story wasn't bad, it's just not as good in comparison to every other Resident Evil game before it. I wanted to go ahead and get it out the way because I didn't have much to say about it other than it's just a story that's competent enough to make you want to pay attention to it. But you're not going to learn anything new, and it's not all that exciting. But just like in every other Resident Evil game, it did end pretty well. So at least you have that. Now let's talk about the biggest change in RE0, the gameplay, and this is where Resident Evil 0 really is a mixed bag. Let's start with the easy stuff first. We're still using tank controls, which works just as good as they always have. We still have fixed camera angles and pre-rendered backgrounds, and of course we're going to be solving puzzles and managing our inventory, but that is where the game gets a little bit interesting. You start off RE0 on a train, which is very weird for Resident Evil because this is a very narrow shaped environment. There's not much you could do here but go forward and backwards, and there's a few side rooms here or there. The first thing I noticed once I got to the save room was I didn't see an item box and just assumed that I would see one eventually. Then I finally met up with Billy and kept playing and I still didn't see an item box. I kept playing hoping that I eventually find one, thinking that this game just was hiding their item boxes from me to make it more difficult. But then God pointed me in the right direction in the menu system and I noticed that I could put things down. And that's when I realized that this game has no item boxes, and this is the first Resident Evil game that introduces the ability to simply drop items where they are. This is something I always wanted for Resident Evil, not because the item box system was bad, it was just because, well, it would only make sense that someone can pick something up and put it right back down. And RE0 introducing this, I thought this would have been an amazing game changer for the series, and I think it can be, but it just didn't work well here. Let me tell you what it does well before I tell you the things that I didn't like. First of all, this game has a new mechanic where if you come up to an item and simply examine it, it will leave it marked on your map. So not only can I just leave items where I found them and mark them on my map, but if I put an item down, I will always know what it is by looking at my map. RE0 is actually the first game in the series that made the map a useful tool, because not only are you going to be using it to remember where the items are that you left behind, but you can also leave items behind strategically as landmarks for certain rooms. And the reason why you might want to do this is because the layout of the levels in RE0 isn't the best. It actually is the worst in the series. Every other Resident Evil game that I played, I didn't have to use my map after a while because eventually each location became so distinct that I could just remember exactly where to go, which door led me where, and I never had to think about it. RE0 doesn't work that way. Many hallways actually lead to dead ends, and not too many rooms loop into other rooms, unlike Resident Evil 1's mansion or even the RPD from Resident Evil 2. So it would be wise to leave certain items behind or even drop some items in certain rooms so you can remember where you're going. And Jehovah God just reminded me of something when it came to the items. Throughout this game, I ran into this issue where I was trying to pick up an item and my character would not pick it up because it kept trying to interact with something in the environment. This is really bad because you would think that maybe this is happening because I dropped an item near something you can interact with, but no. A lot of items are already placed near interactables by the developers, and I struggled to pick up plenty of ammo in this game and other items just because my character kept trying to interact with a wall instead of picking up the bullets I needed. And I have to say, one of the worst decisions they made for this game is removing the 100% completion checklist from each room. I guess they did that because now when you go into a room, you can mark each item and maybe they figured you would just do that, but there's actually hidden ammo and health that you could find in each room in every Resident Evil game, and you would know that something could be there if you looked at the map and realized that you didn't get every item from that room. But now you don't know if you left anything behind, whether it be a key item, health, or ammo. And this game is the hardest game in the series, and that's due to how they balance the game around the dual protagonist mechanic. For the first time in Resident Evil history, you have to manage two playable characters, each with their own abilities, such as Rebecca being able to craft herbs, while Billy could take way more damage. You can even control both of the characters at the same time, but outside of doing this for certain puzzles, it's really useless. Now, where I will give them credit for this system is that for the most part, it does work, and each character having their own personality actually reflects how they play. For example, Billy is more aggressive than Rebecca. So if the AI is controlling Billy, he will just start shooting stuff like all on his own. Where if you're playing as Billy, who I primarily mained, Rebecca will aim at enemies, but she won't necessarily fire until you begin to fire. That's just one of the key differences between the characters and how the AI controls them. I'm only referring to when you have them working together. You can have both of the characters in the same room until the AI to split up. When you do that, then the AI will just fire whenever it needs to. But when you're working together, they take into consideration each character's personality, which I thought was a neat little touch. And remember the way I said each character behaves in combat? That is very important. I mainly control Billy, and this is why. Billy takes way more damage than Rebecca. Rebecca will basically die when she's on caution, whereas Billy could get all the way to danger and even take a little bit more hits after that, depending upon the enemy he's facing. The game even hints that you should be controlling Billy when you're in combat. In most cutscenes, he's doing all the shooting, and even one boss fight, you can only play as Billy. So the game gives the illusion of choice. Now there are times where you have to fight certain enemies only as Rebecca, but again, unless you just want the game to be harder for yourself, I would advise you to play as Billy when you need to fight, and when you're playing as Rebecca, I guess you're just playing as her because you kind of got to. So it sounds like that this mechanic works pretty well, and on the surface it does, it's just everything surrounding it makes it bad. Let's start off with sharing items. Resident Evil 0 wants you to swap items between the characters. There are even segments where they have to split up and you have to put items inside these little elevators and only certain items can go in there and trade items between the characters. I thought this stuff was cool, but it's slow. And that's not the biggest deal. If the game was really good, you could probably tolerate something like that. There are two segments in this game. There's one on the train where they introduce this mechanic to you. It's not that bad because it's just an introduction. But once you get to a later part in the game, you're going to be constantly going back and forth, swapping items through this elevator. Again, it's so slow. And it's not just you're swiping key items. You're also going to be swapping, depending upon the gear that each character has. Maybe Billy found ammo for weapons that only Rebecca has right now, and Rebecca needs them. So now I need to go drop that ammo in there. You're going to probably spend most of your time in RE0 managing the inventory system and swapping items between the characters. And that's not a big deal because managing my inventory has always been fun in Resident Evil games. Finding an item and realizing I need it and I know exactly where it goes, but my inventory is full, so I need to run back to a box. I'm risking my life if I know I'm going on a route where enemies are. All that stuff is still technically here, but it's not fun anymore because of how often you have to do it. The environment itself is not fun to traverse. Ammo and health are limited, meaning every fight is a dangerous one. And let's add this in here, some enemies in this game are bullet sponges and hard to hit. Then let's take this into consideration. Remember I said the map design in this game isn't the greatest? Well, most hallways are super tight, which means you can't really juke past zombies anymore anyway, which is crazy because that's been a thing since Resident Evil 1. That has been a skill that you've probably been developing since Resident Evil 1, and then Resident Evil 0 designs a map where you really can't do that anymore. Outside of a select few rooms, if a zombie's approaching you and it hits you or tries to grab you, you're gonna get hit or grabbed. There's no way to avoid it because there's no room to dodge around them unless you run backwards away from them. But if you need to go forward, you can't like juke past them anymore. All these little issues add up to the bigger issue of the game just not feeling the greatest because it's all the little mistakes that this game makes. Another mistake this game makes is that this is where it gets weird. Sometimes characters will track zombies. So since Resident Evil 2, the characters will look at zombies that aren't even on the screen, which will tell you, the player, that at least you know an enemy is ahead. So you won't just run straight forward into a screen transition and get grabbed. I was originally going to come on here and say that this game removed that feature, but strange enough, there are times where they will do it, but it's so inconsistent. I don't know what causes them to look at zombies or not. And I find it interesting that they look at items now. So if you're in a room and there's an item like on a desk, you'll notice the character will track their head to an item, which I think that is kind of helpful, but I care more about the thing that can kill me, not the item that I can clearly see because it's glowing and flashing now. Speaking of enemies, the leeches and the monkeys are some of the worst enemies that I've experienced in a Resident Evil game. The monkeys are like miniature hunters. They will stun lock you, they run in pairs, and they jump all over the walls. It is cool to shoot one in midair, but that's not enough to save this enemy type. What makes them so bad is that they don't make much sound until they get right up on you. And again, this game doesn't have good head tracking for enemies, so you could run into a monkey that wasn't previously on the screen because it's in the next transition. This is how you're going to get killed by them most of the time. It's almost as if once they catch you, especially if they catch you near a wall, you might as well just put the controller down because you're not getting out of the situation. The leech enemies are annoying for one main reason. The most effective way to kill them is with fire. The problem with this is that the game does not tell you this and you have to figure it out. Jehovah God pointed me in the right direction as I was reading item descriptions, which is something I typically don't do. They mentioned that the Molotov cocktails could take out special types of enemies, and they were referring to the leeches. The reason why the game does a poor job of explaining this to you is not just because it's vague and says special types of enemies. It's because the first time you ever encounter one, all you can do is just shoot at it with your gun. And even in the cutscene, Billy saves you by shooting at it with a gun, which will make you think that you're just supposed to shoot at it with a gun. It's not until you get into the facility that you realize that this is not good to do because, again, bullets are so scarce in this game that if you try this, you're going to quickly realize that you're doing something wrong because you won't have ammo for a good chunk of the game and you'll have to die and just reload because you won't be able to defend yourself. I like the idea of finding gas canisters and bottles in order to make Molotovs, but again, this game has you collected so many items that you need to pick up and put down again that adding even more to it just made it unfun. And this isn't just some item, this is a key item that you need because it's the most effective way to take out these enemies that do a significant amount of damage. And I encourage you to play as Billy, and if you can, leave Rebecca behind because these tentacle attacks can hit both you and Rebecca even if she's standing behind Billy. Another thing about throwing the Molotovs is that these enemies actually take damage between their animations. So most enemies, if they take significant damage, they'll like back up or get stunned. These enemies don't do that all the time, but if you hit them with something, it still took damage. This is a key issue with a lot of enemies in this game. The zombies is not that big of a deal because these enemies aren't that dangerous. But even the monkeys, you could fire at them and they won't make a flinch, but you did damage to them. But it will make you think that you're not doing anything to them, so it will make you stop firing your weapon until you realize that as long as you're hitting them, as long as you're shooting, even if you don't see blood splatter, you could still be hitting them, but there's no indication that you are. All of this just makes the game feel rushed and unfinished. And I'm gonna tell you one of the biggest issues with this game, and that comes from the puzzles. You guys know I love me a good puzzle, and for the most part, the puzzles in this game are okay. But there's one puzzle that absolutely ruined my entire experience with the game, and if it wasn't for me praying to Jehovah God about it, I would have just put the game down and never reviewed it. Let's start off with the good parts first because it's not that many to go over. RE0 borrows from Resident Evil 3's random generation just a tiny bit. A select few puzzles actually have different outcomes depending upon the random number generator working in the background. One of the earliest puzzles when you need to stop the train and you have to solve this simple math problem that actually caught me the first time I played it, but God helped me through it. The first time I played it, the numbers that I had to multiply by and get the answer to was one set of numbers, and then the second time it was a different set of numbers. And I was hoping I was going to see more of this in the game, but the RNG only happens like in the very beginning of the game, which makes me feel like this was going to be what all the puzzles were until they just decided to stop doing it. Another part of the game that I'm going to consider a puzzle is anytime the characters had to split up. Having to find the ice pick in order to give it to Rebecca to unlock the door on the train, or even having to save Rebecca when she was about to fall through a hole. You got to play as Billy and rush your way towards her, and at this point you may not even know where you need to go, but they give you enough time to get there. And even the Centipede boss fight has some puzzle elements to it. Even before the fight starts, Billy has to use a crank and Rebecca has to retrieve an item, and that's when the Centipede grabs her. Because Rebecca can be used, any items that's on Rebecca also can be used. So that means you had to set Billy up beforehand. Now this can be a negative in some people's eyes. To me, I just view this as a trial and error type gameplay, and 9 times out of 10 you would have probably saved before this boss fight, so I don't take it as a big slight, but I can see how that would have been a problem. But once you get to fighting the Centipede, you will see the puzzle elements in the fight itself. I actually died a lot to this boss fight, but Jehovah God showed me the way. First off, unlike every other boss fight that I've experienced in a Resident Evil game, you can't just simply shoot at this enemy. The Centipede actually has a shield around its back and only its belly area can be hit, so you have to wait till it does a certain animation to hit it. It does have the common issue that a few enemies in this game have of you shooting it and it not registering that it's doing damage to it, but as long as you're shooting the belly area, it will be taking damage. Another fun boss fight is the Tyrant boss fight that you could fight with Billy and Rebecca. Now this isn't really a puzzle element per se, but I would say it's involving around strategy. If you take both characters with you, you have to babysit both of them, but you'll be able to technically do twice the amount of damage because both can be firing at once. Whereas you only play as one character, less risk, but you do less damage over time. One of my favorite puzzles in the game was actually this switch puzzle with Rebecca where you have to like match up these nodes to turn the power on. I don't know why I like this puzzle so much, but it was like the best puzzle in the game. But let's get into the worst puzzle in the game. The puzzle that almost made me quit. The statue puzzle. What makes this puzzle so bad, at least from my own personal experience, is when it popped up. It came up when I finally was catching some type of a rhythm, some type of a flow of consistent progression in RE0. But once I hit this puzzle, I was stuck on this game for 2 days. I prayed to Jehovah God to show me the answer to this puzzle, but he didn't do that because he had something better he had to show me. But before we get to that, I want to go through the process of me trying to solve this puzzle on my own. First, I didn't even realize this was a puzzle until I interacted with it, which isn't the biggest a deal. The hint of the puzzle is this: 6 souls imprisoned within the chains of death. Rekindle the flames of life from the spirits of the weak. When I read this, I thought, okay, that's pretty simple. I need to light the weak animals that I see. So I examined all the animals, found the weak ones, and then I lit it, but nothing happened. That's when I realized that I could actually light all of them, and until I light all of the animals, the puzzle would not be solved. I still didn't understand what I was supposed to do, and I thought, well, maybe I'm supposed to light the weak animals based upon what they say. So for example, the wolf mentioned that it could take down any horned enemy. So then I saw that the deer has horns, so I lit the deer. Then I saw that the bird mentioned that it could take out creatures with no legs, so then I lit up the snake. So what I was doing was lighting up each animal that was mentioned to be killed by another animal, but that didn't do anything either. I sorta kinda understood what they were trying to tell me to do, but I couldn't figure out the right order. So I caved a bit and I did Google to find a hint, but not the answer to the puzzle. Somebody mentioned that there was a note that would tell you how the puzzle is solved, but they don't remember where. This was a dummy run on my end, and I did not find this note because it does not exist in the game, but it did show me that this game does not tell you if you collected all the items in the room with 100% completion, which if it did, it would at least told me not to go back and check these rooms because I would have known that I got everything in those particular areas. So after running around trying to find out the order I'm supposed to go in, I finally prayed and said, God, I think I'm gonna just Google it. I don't want to spoil it for me, but I was getting drained. I was stuck on this puzzle for 2 days, and I finally found the answer. And once I found the answer, I said, I don't even understand why this order makes sense. Like, I got some of the order, but I didn't know why this was the right order. What makes this the right order? And that's when God told me to do something. He encouraged me to check what other people were saying about the puzzle online. And would you look at this, so many people got stumped on this puzzle. Some people claimed that the puzzle was easy to understand, but this was rare compared to the amount of people that really got blocked here and had no idea what they were supposed to be doing. Then Jehovah God took me further to realize why this was an issue. This puzzle by itself is not the greatest, but what makes it 10 times worse and almost impossible to solve for most people is that it has a really, really bad English translation. Again, in English it says, 6 souls imprisoned within the chains of death. Rekindle the flames of life from the spirits of the weak. But this is what it says in Japanese. If you take the Japanese text and translate it in Google, it says, 6 souls trapped in a chain of death. Ignite the flame of life starting with the weakest among you. You might say that sounds about the same, but it doesn't. When you say weakest, it gives the person the understanding that I'm supposed to go in order from weakest to strongest. When you say just like the weak, that is why in the beginning I just lit the ones that I thought were weak compared to all of them, not going in some type of order. And then even when I realized I'm supposed to light them all, I don't know, you want me to go from weakest to strongest, or you want me to just do all the weak ones. Like that whole thing frustrated me. And what made it even worse is that the first animal you're supposed to light is the deer. That's the weakest one. Keep in mind that each animal has a description. There is nothing that indicates that the deer is the weakest. You might say, well, it gets eaten by the wolf. Doesn't that make it the weakest? No, because all the animals get taken out by another animal except for one, which is the eagle, which can't get taken out by anything. But technically, if you read the animals' descriptions, you can see that one animal could be taken out by many different animals, and that's where it gets confusing. For example, the lioness says that it could kill anything as long as it sees it, which means it could technically kill the eagle. Now, you might say I'm overthinking things, but this is what happens when you make too vague of a description for puzzles. When the snake says it could take out any king and the lion refers to itself as a king, I can decipher that king is referring to the lion, not king is referring to a human being. That stuff I could figure out. When it says that the eagle could take out a legless animal, and I know the only legless animal here is a snake, that makes sense. That sounds vague until you realize amongst the selection you have, it's not vague. That makes sense. But too many of these descriptions are vague. The deer doesn't mention it could take out anything. The horse doesn't mention it could take out anything either. So how do you know which one is the weakest between them? To me, the horse says it runs away from things. The deer says it stands firm. In my brain, something standing firm is stronger than something running away. And I think that's the overall problem with this puzzle, is that it's so vague and unclear and the description is not translated well. I can't find the Spanish translation, but I've even seen some people say that they play in English even though they're Spanish speakers, because they claim that in Spanish the translation is even more confusing and they need to play in English to even understand any of it. For the amount of people that had a problem with this puzzle, clearly this puzzle just was poorly translated, and even then it's still not the greatest of puzzles, because even after realizing what the answer is, like I said, it still didn't make complete sense. It wasn't like, oh, okay, I see how all this fits together. It's still kind of a guessing game, even if they were clear about it. It just would have been less of a headache, because at least you would have known where to start. Even after getting past this puzzle, it drained me so much that even seeing the big reveal of revisiting places from RE2 and even fighting the Tyrant prototype didn't really bring me back to life. I kept asking God, should I just quit the game, but I'm glad he told me to stick with it. It's crazy, this game can be broken up into a few sections. First is the train segment, which I would say is pretty good and is a nice introduction to teaching the mechanics. Then you have the Umbrella facility, where this game just takes a nosedive in quality, which sucks because this is technically still the beginning of the game. The horribly designed monkeys spawn here, the leech enemies are all around, the animal statue puzzle, which I just ranted about, is here as well. This whole segment just kind of sucks. Once you make it past it, you fight a pretty decent boss fight with a giant bat. And this area here isn't too bad. It's actually pretty decent. The only issue I had with it is the swapping weapons and items back and forth with a little mini elevator in the wall, but that's the least of your worries compared to what you just faced before it. And although that puzzle took a lot of the fun out of the game for me, and I wasn't all that impressed by seeing the revisiting locations from RE2, I will say that this entire part of the game was great. Everything here worked pretty well, and it showed that the systems of RE0 could have been perfectly fine if it wasn't just for this horrible beginning / middle part of the game. And that's what's kind of interesting about RE0, is that it's such a mixed bag. I was going to come in here and say that RE0 is a game that you shouldn't play at all, but I can't really say that. It's just a game that has a lot of issues that I should warn you about before going in, especially if you play
the games in the order I play them in. I play RE1, 2, 3, Code Veronica. All those games were great, and yeah, some games in that lineup are better than the others, but RE0 is like a record scratch. It's really just a jarring turn for the series, where I get why Resident Evil 4 became what it is, because maybe after RE0 they felt like they needed a new change for the series. Again, the game isn't all bad. The last few areas of the game are good, and I enjoyed the last boss fight where Billy and Rebecca had to work together in order to take down the BOW, but not everybody's going to be able to make it past the segment I made it past and keep playing. They're just going to be done with the game once they get annoyed. As far as extra content goes, Resident Evil 0 has a few extra modes. There's a leech mode where you have to go around collecting like these leech type items and fighting different enemies and getting a high score. If either character dies, the game ends. But each character has their own individual like score. Something I didn't mess around too much with. Maybe I'll return to. And then there's a mode where you could play as Wesker and like a evil Rebecca. And Wesker kind of has some of his special moves that he got over the course of the series. That mode is kind of, it's interesting. It's a different way you could play the game, but nothing too crazy. And one of the biggest changes in RE0 is all the extra costumes for Rebecca and Billy. Now you have to buy them, but it is cool that you could customize the characters. And this is something that if they ever were to return to this style of Resident Evil game, I would like to see this rather than having to go find like a key or get a key and then go to a special room. Just let me change the characters' costumes whenever I feel like it. So Resident Evil 0 was a game. It was a game that I experienced, and it's a game that I'm not going to say I would never return to, because it does have the benefit like every other Resident Evil game. As long as you remember the answer to puzzles and where to go, then the game gets easier every time. But the first experience of a Resident Evil game is key to your enjoyment. If you know the first time was amazing, every other time after that is going to be less amazing by default, because you know where everything is and where to go. This is the reverse. My first time wasn't the greatest. It was actually almost just ruined completely. But now that I know where to go, how to solve this horribly written puzzle, it's going to be better than the next time I play it, because I won't have to deal with the headaches of figuring the game out. But figuring the game out was actually one of the fun parts of Resident Evil. So it's a kind of a weird situation where this is the first Resident Evil game where my first playthrough was bad, but every playthrough afterwards will be better than the first one. And that's if I play it again. And if I'm being honest here, I'm not going to say I would never play this game again, because I still like the dual player mechanic, but it's definitely low on the to-do list. Thank you guys for watching. Peace out, keep gaming, God bless. Please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit that hype button. Again, showing you where it is right now, and if you don't see it, you probably need to go onto your mobile devices and hit it. All of this is free and it helps out the channel, and if you made it this far, I appreciate all the help. But let me know what you think in the comment section. Did you like Resident Evil 0? Like I said, to me it's a mixed bag. It's a love-hate relationship, if you will. Let me know if you got hung up on the statue puzzle or any part of Resident Evil 0. And tell me in the comment section your favorite parts and least favorite parts of Resident Evil 0. I would love to hear you guys' opinion on the game. Peace out, keep gaming, God bless. I'll see you guys in the next video, and please make sure to have a blessed 2026.
Billy!
Hey, Queenie! Feast on this!